You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. I'd like to take a minute before we begin to thank our Patreon backers, everyone that has left us a review, everyone that has given us a rating. We see you and we appreciate you. We have some really exciting things in the works, specifically for our Patreon backers, that we cannot wait to share. Hopefully we'll be able to share that in December if everything goes okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome back to Arcane Carolinas. I'm Charlie Mushaw.
I'm Michael Williams, award-winning science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror. That's my other genre. Writer.
You just want to say it again?
Nah.
So it is a sleepy, rainy Sunday afternoon, and Pete from Nerds Adulting has joined us. Pete, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello. Yes, I run a podcast called Nerds Adulting Podcast where we explore all sorts of nerdy pop culture things, bring guests on. We've had some pretty cool people on. I'm going to do a shameless plug and say, yes, we interviewed David Hayter, which was obviously the best episode I've ever done. It was amazing.
Wow.
So, yeah, I learned a lot of stuff. It was actually a really cool episode. So if you're a fan of Metal Gear, I would say check it out. I learned a lot of stuff that I actually didn't know during that interview. So, but I do that. And then I also have a side podcast called Crazed by Wolves, where we analyzed each episode of the new show Raised by Wolves, which was really entertaining. So I'd say check that show out too as well.
We're really happy you're here. I know that I enjoy your podcasts. Full disclosure, we all know each other IRL. In case you're wondering where the crossover comes from, we're all nerds and we know each other IRL. So that's how we got here. Today's story is going to come out of Richland County, South Carolina. Richland is the second most populous county in South Carolina. It was established in 1785 and quite literally named after its rich land.
Wow.
Real creative types.
You really workshopped that one.
What made it rich? Was it their land was like fertile?
Yeah, that was it. Big agrarian culture. It was originally inhabited by Congaree and Wateree tribes, and it was part of the Cherokee Path, which is one of those really important trade routes that Michael talks about back in the Devil's Tramping Ground episode. Home to the largest and most active intake and training facility for the United States Army, as well as the University of South Carolina.
Oh, so is this where Columbia is?
It is where Columbia is.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're following the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, slowly but surely the gears turn up here.
Some local businesses that caught my eye. Full disclosure, I've never been to Columbia. After reading up on this stuff, I want to go, and I would very much like to find an excuse to. So if there are any fandom conventions or anything in Columbia that hear this, let us know about it. Some local businesses that caught my eye were River Rat Brewery in Columbia. They have a really cool logo, and that's what first caught my eye because, that's how that works. But they seem to be making some really interesting and different beers that I would definitely try. But what really lit me up on wanting to visit Columbia was this really cool shop called Heroes and Dragons, sort of a comic book pop culture store. What caught my eye about them was exactly how fair the prices were on like vintage items. So they have a lot of big glass display cases of old Transformers and stuff like that. And they don't gouge. It's not flea market prices, but it's also not eBay. It was somewhere in the middle. And I was like, this is fantastic. And I immediately looked at every single picture that people posted looking for Tonka Supernaturals. And
I'm just going to ask.
A little update on that. A listener was kind enough to point out that I was wrong about something on Tonka Supernaturals. That while the main line were the little squat robed holographic people or monsters, whatever, they did create like 2 or 3 6-inch full-size action figure ones. But I will counter and say that they did the same thing with those and just slapped a different holographic sticker on the front of each of them. So take that.
Somebody tried to step to your Tonka knowledge. And
yeah, look, man, we can talk about Rock Lords and GoBots all day. Don't mess with my Supernaturals. Still haven't found the green one in the wild. So anyway, enough about that. Columbia, South Carolina seems like a really interesting place on the surface. And when you go below the surface, it gets even weirder. So this is the second episode where I'm driving this month that is about tunnels. I swear that I will talk about something other than tunnels next month.
There's nothing wrong with having an interest.
So Columbia, South Carolina has 3 distinct networks of tunnels. One relates to an old asylum. There's the steam tunnels at USC. And then there's a network of what people commonly refer to as catacombs under the city, some of which date back to the late 1700s and span 16 miles.
Okay. Are you going to talk about the history of these catacombs? Because I need to know more about the history of these catacombs.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about them.
Okay.
Here's the thing. There's so much mystery around them. You'll find a lot of information online that says, people's blog posts like, oh, they're from the Civil War. Mm-hmm. They were there during the Civil War, but they're not from the Civil War. They predate that by a very long period of time. They were built shortly after the town was incorporated as the state capital. So Columbia existed, but it wasn't the original capital. They made it the capital. And then they built in this network of tunnels that had river access points so that visiting dignitaries and VIPs could be moved in and out of the city during times of unrest. Undetected.
I think it says a lot about antebellum Southern culture that they needed that. I feel like maybe they should have been a little more self-aware about where things were going. I don't know.
They're really cool. You can find tons of videos on them online. The original wood, these like huge timbers, like the Roman roads would sometimes have like big timbers and stuff in them. It's kind of like that, except underground. So they have these massive timbers in the ground and they flood all the time. But the original wood is still there in portions of them. And apparently it's super easy to get into them because there's a million videos on YouTube of people exploring.
I find this fascinating in part because one of my favorite features of San Francisco is that historically the shadiest part of San Francisco was this part of town on the north end of the peninsula called the Barbary Coast, popularly. And there were a bunch of tunnels for smuggling in the Barbary Coast part of the city. And those are almost impossible to access now. There are only a couple of places where you can get to them via anything like legitimate means.
You're not supposed to go in these. It just is very obvious that a lot of people do.
It sounds not safe.
No, it's not.
It doesn't sound like someplace I would want to go, but hey.
I'd be down there. I'd be down there in a heartbeat. I'd wait for a dry spell and then I'd go down there. Mm-hmm. Probably not now. Younger me would.
Like, I remember when I worked for Comcast and we would go into attics and stuff and it'd be really hot. We'd be like, all right, man. We'd call somebody and say, I'm going into this area. I'm going to be in here for a long time. If you don't hear back from me in like about 20 minutes, call me back. So.
Right. Yeah, you would definitely need an adventure buddy and somebody to know where you're at.
Let me know when you go in there just so I know that you're safe.
So there's a ton of rumors and legends about these tunnels. Like you said, Michael, you mentioned smuggling. People bring up smuggling. They bring up the Underground Railroad. I have no doubt that these were used for those purposes, but that's not the original purpose for which they were built. The creepiest thing I found was a video of a historian that does like local history tours, just threw out a reference to disappearances in 1972 of people in the tunnels. He was going on about the tunnels and he says, they really need to keep people out of there and blah, blah, blah. We don't want to have another disappearance like 1972. And then just kept going.
I need to know more about that.
Yeah.
And the person doing the interview didn't ask any questions, just as if it were common knowledge. Oh, yeah. And just kept going.
That's like a footnote straight out of a Stephen King story. Like in every Stephen King novel, the town in Maine, wherever something bad is happening, has the fire that took 37 lives or whatever. The time that church caved in, the time that school blew up. It's always got something like that. And everybody just kind of writes it off as, oh yeah, the great tragedy that defines our existence.
So if anyone is listening to this and knows about the tunnel disappearances in Columbia, South Carolina of 1972, please send us information because search and search and search. And, you find a lot of like really sad, like missing children's cases and stuff, but I couldn't actually tie them to the tunnels. So I have no idea what that guy was talking about.
One of my best friends in the world lives in Columbia. And at the beginning of this, I was thinking, well, if, life is ever normal again and I get to go visit him, then we're obviously going to go find these tunnels and go poke around in them because I am old and I don't care anymore. And now my thought is, no, I need him to hit the public library and do some digging on this stuff.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. But the topic of today's talk is the three-eyed man, sometimes called Third Eye Man, other times called Sewer Man, which is probably his least popular or least favorite moniker to be referred to as.
I'm getting Rat King vibes here. I don't know why. Some like dude in like, I don't know, like torn up garments, like leading rodents underneath this area. I don't know, with this third eye. I don't know. Getting weird supervillain vibes out of it.
You know what's funny is that in my notes I have a Ninja Turtle reference later. So the fact that you just said that, that's outstanding.
I will say that yes, in our prior conversation you had mentioned Ninja Turtles, and that's probably why it's stuck in my head. So I'm interested to see where you go with it.
So like tunnels are so fascinating because we see them in pop culture all the time. Ninja Turtles, obviously. Sega CD had that game Sewer Shark, which was not a particularly good game, but it had
any Sega CD games good? I mean,
I would say Sonic
Night
CD.
Trap? Okay, all right, I'll give you that.
They redid Night Trap and re-released it for the Switch in the last year or so, which is pretty funny.
I don't want to go on a side tangent, but if anyone's listening, you should go look into the whole political thing that happened with Night Trap. It's pretty interesting. All the misinformation that went on during this time before internet. It's a really interesting story. Just like Google Night Trap and politics. It's really interesting. So I'm sorry. It was something that popped in my head. Super interesting.
Don't apologize. We have all the time in the world. And also the Netflix documentary High Score covers it really well. If you don't like to read, you can just watch the Netflix video game documentary High Score, and they explore it, and they have clips from the congressional hearings and everything where people are like, Night Trap is killing our children.
I like the one where they talk about like vampires sucking the blood and turning people upside down or something, and like none of that actually happened. Like it was just really wild, like how they go from one point to get to this other point, which never. Like, did you guys even play the game? But no. I guess side tangents happen on all podcasts. So
had somebody marketed their game as vampires turn people upside down and drain their blood, I would have been like, that sounds like a great game. Get me that game immediately. I'll go buy the platform for it too while I'm at it. Why not?
The development history of it is they started with one direction and executives kept meddling with it and being like, no, change what the bad guy is. No, change how they move. No, you know what? We're not even releasing this. So then it got picked up and released through another platform as this just abomination. Kimberly from Different Strokes is in it.
What?
Yeah. I mean, not as Kimberly from Different Strokes, but
that'd be a weird crossover.
Mr. Drummond makes a cameo. Arnold and Willis are the unlockable characters.
Yeah.
You got their DLC. You got to pay extra to get
pay
down.
Extra, yeah, DLC.
Right. Definitely.
Microtransactions.
Oh man, I got to pay for the ones that I want. To our younger listeners, Different Strokes was a sitcom in the 80s.
I was literally thinking, oh, I'm so glad there's a pop culture reference old enough for me to get.
Okay. We are going to be talking about what I will refer to as Third Eye Man. He allegedly stalks around the area near the Long Street Theater in downtown Columbia during the nighttime. But during the day, he goes into his network of tunnels underneath the city, never to be discovered, except that there's sightings. So I guess he was discovered. So the story goes that the Third Eye Man was first spotted on November 12th, 1949 at 10:43 p.m.
Very specific.
And you may be saying, Charlie, that's very specific. How did you manage to find that? There is a book called Haunted South Carolina by a fellow named Alan Brown. And his is the only source that I could find that had these specific details. So I found that to be very interesting. Mr. Brown went real hard on the nitpicky details. It's part of the campus of the University of South Carolina. 2 students reported a strange man dressed in bright silver garments opening a manhole cover at the corner of Sumter and Green Streets opposite the historic Long Street Theater. They claimed, they were like, what's that guy doing? Watched him go into it and carefully pull the manhole back over just like a Ninja Turtle would. Like just, hand comes out, whoop, puts the manhole cover back down.
I was getting Lube Man from Watchmen vibes. When you talk about he was in silver garments, but even though he didn't do it that way, but I don't know if you remember in the Watchmen when he like squirts himself with lube, he looks like it's like the silver latex thing and then slides underneath. I know when you said silver garments, that's what I was getting when that was the reference in my head.
I'm picturing the workout suits from Christmas Vacation that the neighbors wear, Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her husband, how they wear those like foil suits.
Yep.
That's what I had in my head. But this is 1949, so obviously that suit did not exist. So he goes back underground. One of the students, named Christopher Nichols, class of 1953, wrote for the student newspaper, The Gamecock, and immediately spread the news of Sewerman in an article. Unfortunately, after a few weeks, all interest died off and people didn't go hunting for Sewerman. So 6 months later, April 7th, 1950, he was spotted again, this time by a university police officer.
Oh.
So there's a university police officer on patrol, and he's on the beat looking around the Long Street Theater, checking the loading dock. And there's what is described on various sources as mutilated chickens, chicken guts, chicken carcasses, feathers everywhere. Basically, destroyed chickens on the loading dock. Feathers, chicken parts everywhere. He figured that this mess was left by fraternity students or pranksters, which when I read that, I was like, that's kind of dark.
Yeah, that's a little grim.
All right, your hazing is you got to go spread chicken guts over the loading dock.
Right. No.
Now, these details are consistent across all the websites and books that I could find. So I found that to be interesting as well, where they're like, the police officer thought it was pranksters. So he goes back to his car to call in what had happened. On the way back to the dock to like go clean it up. So he calls in and says like, hey, I got a thing I got to deal with. Take me out of commission for a minute. I got to go clean this up. Huddled over the chicken guts was a person dressed in silver garments.
Okay. I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to, like, do they ever give any indication of whether, what exactly does silver garments mean?
It's never it's never specific.
Because like in my head, I'm immediately picturing zoot suit or like disco outfit or something. I'm imagining apparel, but I would also imagine that it's possible to picture this as like a jumper.
I'm picturing like robes in my head.
Okay.
Tattered cloths draped over a humanoid form.
Maybe it was a toga, and that's why the cop thought it was pranksters.
Right. Toga. So there's this humanoid, what he believes to be a person, crouched down, facing away from him so he can't see the face, messing with the chicken guts. Turns his flashlight on. Hey, this person, I use that term loosely, turns to face him and has a grotesque and ashen face with disturbing features, and in the middle of his forehead, a third eyeball.
I am immediately a huge fan of Third Eye Man.
One of the websites that I read as I'm researching this said, now it's not a big eyeball, but it's an eyeball, which I found to be
it's not, Leela. It's
Then how big is it? I mean, could it have been like someone with just a really big zit? Like, I don't know. Maybe if it's consistent over time, then maybe not. But like how you have like these weird things that happen. And like, I remember a story about someone said they saw a UFO and it was a big deal, but it turned out there was this helicopter that had like one side of its windows were tinted. And so when it spun around, it reflected it. And so it looked like a UFO, but it wasn't. So I'm wondering if this is like one of those cases where maybe it was just acne or just something weird, like a blemish on his forehead. And
not too big, not too small, eyeball just right. Third Eye Man.
It's the Goldilocks of eyeballs.
Right. So this creature has this eyeball. The officer freaks out and runs away.
I really want to know in what form this officer reported it, because for all the light I'm making of it, the fact that it was a campus cop who reported this is one of those instances where it kind of lends it more credence.
Well, apparently other officers responded because he just like freaked out and ran back to his car. Because this is before the days of everyone carrying a radio, I'd assume. I mean, in some settings, there weren't even radios in cars by 1950. There would be like a call box on every block, and the officer would go to the nearest call box or whatever.
Yeah, you see that in movies and stuff.
Right. In these accounts, it was consistent that he went back to his car. So he runs back to his car and he calls. His backup shows up and he's just in hysterics and incoherent, yelling about what he saw. They're like, all right, let's go check it out, Jim. Or, whatever his name happened to be. And they go and there's like feathers and detritus of chickens left around, but no Third Eye Man. And they just didn't believe him. They were like, we don't know what you're on about right now, but it's kids messing with you. That's not real.
That's pretty wild.
So about 20 years later, in the late 60s, the catacombs or underground tunnels at the university are like a favorite place of students. And they go down there and there's graffiti and it's a place to hang out, and fraternities use it for hazing. And we talked about this a little bit in the Raleigh Blob episode. When I was in college, I used to love to go to try to get into every tunnel I could. Oh, there's steam tunnels? Let's get in them. Oh, there's, a network of drainage tunnels that are big enough to walk in. Let's go see where they go. It's just like you're curious, you're a kid. They love going down there. And the tunnels underneath the university actually connect buildings. So one night in early October, there's a bunch of frat guys take 3 pledges down to the tunnels for a challenge. And they go in the tunnels in the basement of Gambrel Hall. And they head west towards the Horseshoe. Now, I have no idea what that reference means because I've never been to the University of South Carolina.
Okay, yeah. I mean, assumedly, it's some sort of geographic feature.
So they head west towards something called the Horseshoe. And as they round the corner, they're met by what they described as a crippled-looking man dressed all in silver.
I really want to know more. Like, what does crippled-looking mean? Did he have a walker? Did he have 2 canes?
Right. Like, there's not a lot of detail outside of the fact that he had a third eyeball in the middle of his forehead.
And this is 20 years later. There's probably very little chance that those guys had known that cop or read that account in the newspaper or whatever.
At first, they thought it was a prank. They thought that it was some other fraternity brother, like that it was part of the setup.
Sure.
Until he charged at them with a pipe.
Oh, God.
And got a hold of one kid named Matthew Tabor, who he knocked down. Matthew Tabor allegedly suffered minor cuts and minor shock. So he whacks the guy. They all run, and that gives him his opening to flee deeper into the tunnels. They immediately go to the police, who launch a huge hunt. They immediately are like, all right, we're going underground. This is an assault. This is on campus. We have to investigate this. So they went and they explored all the tunnels, found nothing, but decided to start sealing them off around campus at that time. So these tunnels are nothing but trouble. We need to make sure that this is off limits. You will be expelled if you're caught in them. And that's what happened. Here's a quote, an unattributed quote, which is always, pinnacle of journalistic integrity from maintenance personnel. This is a current quote. "We don't use the tunnels unless it's absolutely necessary. There's been sightings in the 80s and early 90s, though those were written off and dismissed by the police."
I feel like there's a very high likelihood that the point at which the authorities have said, we've sealed the tunnels, it's safe now, nobody's allowed to go back, is also probably the cutoff point for anyone being willing in any official capacity to lend credence to a sighting. It's got a very big Jaws kind of vibe.
It's what's her name from Raleigh, from the Sanitation Commission.
Yeah, exactly.
We disavow all knowledge and it's not our responsibility. There is no Raleigh blob.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, why is he carrying a pipe? Like, does he just carry it with him wherever he goes? And
he's got to whack the chickens.
Were there chickens around during the second incident?
I mean, tunnel chicken is a regional cuisine. I have no idea.
It kind of makes me wonder, was he like walking along using the pipe as a cane? And then they're like, crippled elderly person with 3 eyes and silver robes. No big deal. Whatever. That's clearly Bob from across the hall back at the frat house. Then, he like hefts the pipe and comes swinging, teaching these kids a lesson. I'm very much on Team Third Eye Man from start to finish.
You kids, you look me in my good eye and you hear what I say. Get out.
What if he has like a lazy eye? Like, how some people are like self-conscious about a lazy eye, but dude's got a third eye.
Yeah.
Try not to stare at it, but if it's
dude,
like
when I get tired, my one eye starts to drift. I can't imagine having 3. They'd be going all different directions. It would be no good. It'd be all kinds of no good.
And then I just picture him getting older, like over. He says like 20 years almost, and then as he's getting older, he's getting more hunchbacked and having more issues to get around. So then he discovers this pipe, and that's his cane now, thanks to Michael's reference of that. I'm getting like this like weird backstory in my head of how he came to be at this time. I wonder what happened now between those 2 sightings. That's a long time. That's 20 years. Like a lot could have happened. Like, did he fall in love? Did he have?
It's a lot of chicken. All we know is he likes what I'm envisioning as silver sweatsuits, chickens, and lead pipes. That sounded like Clue. It was the third eye man in the tunnel with the chicken and a lead pipe.
Well, the chicken is clearly the murder victim. I like your question, Pete, though, about does he fall in love? Like, how much of a life does he have down there? It could be a rich life, and we don't know that because we're not privy to whatever the details of life down there might be.
Yeah, like, does he put on a hat and come up during the day, cover his third eye?
Yeah.
Or bandana?
There's a great Twilight Zone episode that suggests that's possible.
What if they rounded the corner and found like a little office with a little framed picture of like some third-eyed kids and like... It's like, oh, we're the bad guys in this story. We are not the heroes of this tale. This guy's got a bunch of 3-eyed family members, and It's just living his best three-eyed life.
Y'all are being much kinder than I am, because in my head, I immediately went towards, well, what if this is basically the episode Home from X-Files?
Oh.
And this is the member of the family that the public ever encounters, because the rest of them are further back in the tunnels. He's just the one who's capable enough to defend them against outside attentions.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot. So let's come back to what exactly he is in a second.
Okay.
What we think he is. Because it's really interesting to me the consistency with which this is retold across websites and books that it's included in, with the exception of that one that all the extra details. I'm like, where did you find that? Maybe Alan Brown's the third eye man. I don't know.
Maybe. My guess is that Alan Brown went to the morgue for the student newspaper and, read the story firsthand.
So I tried to search the paper archives, and I understand that 1949 is an exceptionally long time for a student newspaper to have records back, and they didn't go back that far that I could find. And the Alumni Association, because, we had the name of the author of the article, the Alumni Association was of zero help. They only had records public going back to the 70s. Which I was like, come on, guy, I'm trying to find that third eye man. Ooh, this just occurred to me. They only had things going back to the 70s. The incident in 1972. Not knowing what that incident is, I don't want to make too much light of it in case it's actually something terrible.
My assumption is that it was tragic.
It wasn't happy. I found one website that said the entire thing is a creative writing assignment that a student uploaded to an undisclosed website in the 1990s. But that to me is really nebulous, because if you wrote that and the legend got that big, you would claim that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the Andre the Giant has a posse stickers, there's a lot of urban legendary around those stickers, but ultimately the person who created them has been very vocal about being the person who created them.
Right. I don't buy that dismissal of it, because also I feel like it would be reported. Every college newspaper every fall does a whole bunch of here's the spooky stories from our campus. It's just kind of run of the mill storytelling, and they would have figured that out and included that somehow. I don't buy that. So I don't know.
It was a series of weird circumstances, like the person that wrote it passed away and couldn't claim it, and the person that maybe the editor of the paper went crazy, just one of a bunch of weird things happened, and then there was no one that could vouch for this story being fake. And now it lives on. I really like it. It's weird. It's got tunnels. It's creepy because it's what is the third eye man? Is it a chud? Is it a person? For our younger listeners, Chud is a terrible 80s horror movie from... Don't waste your time watching it unless you're really into super campy, low-budget horror.
Yeah, there's better stuff out there.
Yeah, it's not particularly good. Alien, cryptid, experiment gone wrong.
I'm just wondering what was going on between all that time. I don't know why I'm stuck in that. That's a long time to come out and be cited, and be caught seen. What is going on between all this time?
Are either of you familiar with John Keel's theory of the ultra-terrestrials?
The people that live in the earth?
No.
Okay.
John Keel, the guy who wrote the Mothman prophecies and did a bunch of paranormal research in the 60s and 70s, he had a theory eventually that he arrived at that a kind of creature that he called the ultra-terrestrials were basically interdimensional trickster spirits. And they show up and they take the form of whatever seems weird in the moment. And then they make sure to show back up every now and then as that to defy any sort of attempt to apply logic or chronology to the sightings of that thing. And ultimately, they're potentially responsible for everything from fairy circles in the Middle Ages to UFO abductions today. The third eye man kind of slots nicely into the ultra-terrestrials theory for me. Because basically, what if this is a manifestation of something out of the collective human unconscious that gets spotted every now and then in Colombia when it's been just long enough for people to have forgotten it?
Would that fall under Hollow Earth?
No, ultra-terrestrials are interdimensional.
Okay. Because there was that explorer. He was a reputable military officer.
Right. I don't remember his name, but the guy who claimed that he saw the entrance into the Hollow Earth.
Yeah. And he went to Antarctica in the wake of World War II. And there's all kinds of theories about what they were doing down there. They sent a whole naval fleet to the Antarctic. One of the stories was, they're going to root out secret Nazi base. Some of the other theories were, it's just a training exercise to prepare for fighting the Soviets. But this one officer came back and, to his grave, swore that he encountered people that lived subterranean lives in the Antarctic. Well, not people. They weren't humans. Maybe that's what the third eye man is.
I was getting Phantoms vibes when you were talking about this like altered terrestrial thing. Because remember in Phantoms, it was actually like these like weird beings that took over humans, and then they all thought he was the devil, or the thing was the devil. So that's why it took on that persona.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how it was like exuding itself as a being as the devil, but it really wasn't. It was this weird thing that was here before humans even existed.
What is the line from Ghostbusters? Choose the form of your destruction.
Oh.
Choose.
Shaver. In the 30s and 40s, he published a bunch of stories that he claimed at the time were true that were about two ultra-terrestrial species of humanoids called the Darrows and the Taros, and they were at war with each other, and one of them was trying to help humanity, one of them was trying to harm humanity, and they had revealed their hidden truths to him. It's kind of got that vibe of there being a secret. It's not exactly a subset of humanity, but some sort of co-evolved hominid.
The two being in conflict and one wanting to help and one not. If this were Looney Tunes, a tiny cartoon Tom DeLonge would have popped up on my shoulder and been like, yeah, man. Because that's like a big thing that his organization and his books push, is that there's these interdimensional beings and some of them want to help and some of them want to hurt. Anyway.
Yeah.
That could explain, can't remember the guy's name, that he does investigations on exorcisms, and he's not religious at all, but he believes that exorcisms are real. I forgot his name. It's really fascinating stuff. He witnessed like 1,000 different exorcisms.
And what is that book called?
Yeah, that's right. He did write a book, but that also kind of makes me think that maybe that's like another type of thing where there's no other way to explain it. It's such a weird scenario of a person being overtaken by this being that we can't see or understand.
Malicious spirits. Well, in conclusion, so that's it for the story. That's all I have. I don't have the universal truth of the third eye man.
No.
I did not solve the decades-long mystery. I hate to tell you.
Pull him on camera.
I'm just envisioning walking the streets of Columbia near that theater with like a couple bags of chicken, and just rattling the bags.
Yeah.
Here, third eye man, third eye man, third eye man.
This is a weird question to say out loud, but I wonder what having a third eye would actually do to your vision, since having two eyes on the front of your head is what gives us binocular vision and depth perception. I wonder if the third eye can like see in other spectra.
Ooh,
that would be nice.
I would want that. I don't want another regular third eye. I want my third eye to do something cool, like shoot lasers or see wavelengths that I can't.
I was thinking, like, what would you say to attract the attention specifically of Third Eye Man? And I thought, well, what if it were something along the lines of, gosh, if only I had a friend who could help me x-ray this chicken and then eat it.
What if the third eye went bad and he had to wear a single, like, monocle on, like, a headband?
I'm just imagining now an optometry visit with Third Eye Man. Like, you have to have like a special device, right, to fit all three of his eyes. Like, how would you? Okay, we're going too deep into this.
Just get him to scoot down a little in the seat.
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, that was one that I came across a little while ago, and it hit the right notes for me as being something that you could mold it to fit any number of theories, and it was consistently told enough that I was like, okay, this is cool. We'll talk about this.
I really find this fascinating because it's at the height of American fascination with the idea of like little green men, quote unquote, you know, and the idea that there are aliens and they're among us and they kind of look like us, but not exactly. It's also got that favorite touch of mine, which is somebody who has something to lose identifies themselves as having seen the phenomenon, which is one of those harbingers of it having been a real experience. I don't know if this guy literally saw a dude with three eyes, but I do believe that he had an experience that it really affected him, and that's what he remembered seeing.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. Things like that just endlessly fascinate me. They're a mystery that doesn't have an answer, but there's something real there.
That makes me think more about the recent UFO footage that the government released. Like, you know, because I heard the stories of pilots saying what they saw. Then you actually have the video showing this like crazy stuff happening. That's what makes me kind of piggyback off what you're saying. Like, you have these pilots that, for lack of a better term, sane, normal people, and they have these experiences up there, and they've all had the same experiences, and now we have video footage. So it's just like, what the hell?
I particularly love in those videos when you can hear the pilots saying to each other, oh, that is definitely not ours, and I don't know what it is.
Yeah. It's almost like you can hear the terror in their voice, sort of like, like in the back, like freaking them out.
Yeah. They hold it together, but they're like, what is that? I don't know. Do you see it? I see it. Okay. Well, we have confirmation. We both see it. Do you know what it is? I don't know what it is.
We've talked about it before. There's a book that Charlie recommended in a previous episode, and I've read it also, called On the Record. And it is just folks who are in government or in militaries of different governments telling their stories of what they have seen in terms of unidentified flying objects. And a lot of them say, I'm not saying that it's aliens. I'm saying that it's a flying object that I don't know how to identify. But a lot of them have very extreme experiences to share. And they're all people with reputations on the line.
Yeah. In your words, they have something to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not looking for a reality TV deal.
Yeah.
They're not shopping their story for anything.
They're not trying to turn it into a movie. They're not trying to turn it into a book. They're just telling what happened to them because it was important enough that they feel it's worth sharing.
Reminds me of the story of the original abduction story, but between these two couples, it tore like their life apart, and they eventually didn't want to talk about it anymore. But it was really interesting what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's find a reference to that and put it in the show notes because I don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah, Barney and Betty Hill.
But it was really weird because the guy was like sexually assaulted, and it was at the time it was really weird to talk about, and he didn't want to. I don't think.
Interesting.
I'll link to it in the show notes.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.
So we're going to redo that because I don't want to sound like I can't math.